there, Jess from Make a Do Crew here, and I want to show you how I have been crocheting a weighted blanket by adding these plastic beads in between rows of crochet. This technique is amazing because it does not require pre-stringing any of the beads. You just pick them up as you go, making it really rhythmic and relaxing. Now, I have to give credit to StitchWitch_87 on TikTok, who first introduced me to this method. Her name is also Jess, and you should definitely check out her profile to see what she's making with this technique of adding beads to your crocheting. My kids and I all have some struggles with sensory processing, and we love a good weighted blanket. So when I saw this method, I knew I had to get started on my own. If you'd like to work a single row of this bead technique, you can definitely add it to the edge of a basket or a pillow or a lot of other home deck projects. I'm going to show you how to create repeated rows like this, and this is perfect for making your own weighted blanket, or if you have a kiddo with some sensory needs like I do, being under something heavy can be amazingly calming, and these little beads are fun to fidget with. I realize though that understanding how many stitches you need to start with and how heavy your blanket will end up is a little bit of a puzzle. So I created a weighted blanket calculator for you so that you know exactly how many stitches to start with to create the blanket size that you want and how much you can then expect that blanket to weigh. Check it out in the description box below. This technique works well with a worsted weight yarn. That's a medium weight yarn, and I have some suggestions down below of some of the heaviest worsted weight yarns, meaning that each yard of yarn weighs the most. And the reason that this is important is simply if you're trying to crochet a weighted blanket and you want to make sure that each inch of fabric is as heavy as it possibly can be. Of course, if you have a slightly thinner worsted weight yarn, that will work too, but over the course of a large blanket, using a slightly heavier worsted weight yarn will result in a blanket that is several ounces heavier. And of course, you're also going to need a lot of pony beads for this. These are simply plastic beads. I have links to them down below. These particular ones glow in the dark, which is extra fun for a sensory blanket for a kiddo. And then the hooks you use for this project are quite important. You're going to need two of them. The first one should be somewhere between 2.75 millimeters and about 3.5 millimeters. This one is a size E hook, that's 3.5 millimeters. And what you're looking for is a hook that can easily be inserted into the bead with a piece of yarn pulled through. So go for the largest hook that you have that can still fit inside a bead hole. The larger the hook is, the easier it's going to be to work with your yarn. And then you need a second hook that's larger. This one is a 5 millimeter size H hook, and this is what you're going to use on the rows where you're not inserting beads. So a size I, H, or maybe even a J can work well for your second hook. We're going to kick it off by using our large hook. To get started, we want to chain a multiple of 2 plus 1, so essentially any odd number. Assuming that you're using worsted weight yarn, you can use a rough estimate that 20 stitches is going to be somewhere between about 5 and 5.5 inches, which means that if you wanted to make a blanket that is 40 inches wide, you would need somewhere around 145 chains to begin. So if you're just practicing right now and making a little swatch along with me, somewhere in the ballpark of 21 stitches or 27 stitches, or today I'm going to be chaining 41. Again, we just want it to be any odd number. Once that foundation chain is complete, we're going to continue with our large hook here and do a row of half double crochet. I'm going to skip the first and second chain and work into the third chain from the hook. And if you are familiar with foundation half double crochet, that's where you work the chain and the first row of stitches at the same time, so you don't have to work into this tedious little chain. That's an awesome way to start a project like this. I'm going to show the most beginner friendly way though, so I am just half double crocheting into each chain until we get to the end of our foundation chain. When your first row is complete, it's a good idea to count your stitches and make sure that you have an odd number. So the number should be 2 less than what you originally chained, because we're not going to count our little turning chain here as a stitch. So all that's really important here is that you have an odd number of stitches, because that's going to become important when we start adding our beads. So now for row 2, I'm going to switch to my smaller hook, and I'm just going to chain 2 here and turn and work in the opposite direction. And because this doesn't count as a stitch here, that tells us we need to work into our next stitch right here, which is our first actual stitch. So I'm just going to place a half double crochet here This is going to feel different because you're using that tiny hook now, but that's what's going to allow you to add the beads. So I am now going to grab a bead and I'm just going to stick it on my hook, and then I'm going to work into the next stitch just as if I was working a typical single crochet. I'm just going to yarn over and pull my yarn through that bead as I'm finishing my single crochet. Pretty cool, huh? Now in the next stitch I want to work a half double crochet. We're going to alternate half double crochet between each of our beads. Again, I just pick up a bead, pop it on my hook, and then single crochet in the next stitch. So when I'm pulling these up, it looks like this, and then I just yarn over and pull it through that bead. You want to make sure here that you pull your loop up high enough. It kind of, because of the friction inside of the bead, it can get a bit tight, and that would cause your swatch to sort of fold in like this, and the second row would become narrower than the first row. So we just want to give that a little tug, make sure it's loose enough, and then carry on with our next half double crochet. Grab a bead and single crochet in the next stitch. Half double crochet in the next stitch, pop that bead on, single crochet. I sort of expected this bead business to be a bit cumbersome and tedious, but it's actually just becomes an easy part of the rhythm once you get going. And it feels so satisfying to work each of these beads in and see it find its little home in the row. So we're just going to continue like that across the row, and I'll show you how to end it here when we get to our last stitch. As I approach the end of the row here, I have 2 stitches left, so I need to put one more bead on here, and I'm going to show you the way I've been liking to pick them up. It's just popping them on my hook like that, saves the step of lifting them up with my fingers. And then I'm just going to complete that single crochet, tuck my bead in there, and then work one more half double crochet in my last stitch. Again, we're not worrying about those turning chains there. They are just not going to count. So your edge should look something like that. And we're now ready to move back to our larger hook for row 3. So I'm going to pop that in there and chain 2. As we turn and work in the opposite direction, we're going to half double crochet in each stitch. So if you look this way, it looks just like the crochet stitches you're used to, but if you flip it this way, it kind of looks confusing. So the easiest way to think about this is that you're just working on either side of the bead. That will ensure that you're working under each of these stitches. So I'm going to begin by putting a half double crochet on this side, again a half double crochet on this side. So I've worked into my first 2 stitches, now I have 2 more, half double crochet on the right of the bead, half double crochet on the left of the bead. Now, could you be using a different stitch here? Maybe one that's a bit taller and has better drape for a blanket? Absolutely. If you wanted to substitute double crochet here for this row crochet, you absolutely could, and that would create a little bit of a drapier fabric, and your rows would grow a bit faster because double crochet is taller than half double crochet. The consideration to keep in mind though is that that will also mean your beads are spaced a bit further apart vertically, and that will result in a lighter blanket overall, since the bead frequency is what's creating the weight in the blanket. So if you're okay with a bit lighter blanket and you just want to make sure it goes a little quicker or drapes nicely, I would put double crochet in every other row here. But if you want to just get a dense blanket that's nice and heavy and soothing, then opt for half double crochet. So we're going to work like this on either side of the bead in every stitch until we get to the end of this row. Now, I have been crocheting over 30 years. At the end of a half double crochet row still confuses me, so I want to point out how to finish it just in case you often get confused too. So I've worked a half double crochet on this side of my bead, and I need to do that in my next stitch right here. But if I stopped here, I would be skipping my final stitch that I need to work into here. And if at any point you're confused, you can count your stitches and make sure you have an odd number. But at the end of our half double crochet row, we should be working into the stitch that's after the bead right here, and then the following stitch also, because if you remember from the beginning of our row, we started with a half double crochet before we put that bead on. Now we've officially finished the row. It's looking so cool, isn't it? I think this would be such a cool addition to the top of a bag or a belt, or maybe even the bottom of a decorative towel. We're gonna work our next bead row now, so that means I need to switch to my smaller hook. I'm going to chain 2, turn and work in the other direction, and I'll show you how to start this again as a refresher, and then you are off to the races. So if you remember here, we want to start with our half double crochet in the first stitch. So that goes right there. Then I can grab a bead. I've got it ready, and I can insert my hook here to single crochet that bead on, half double crochet in the next stitch, pick up a bead, insert my hook and complete that single crochet, half double crochet in the next stitch, and there you go. Now, the only thing that stands between you and the coziest blanket of your dreams is some yarn and some beads. Be sure to check out the information down below to know exactly how many stitches you need to start out with in order to make the blanket size you want, and then estimate how much that blanket is gonna weigh. I love it if you'd leave a comment and let me know what you plan to make with this skill. And please consider subscribing. I have lots more free crochet patterns and tutorials I'd love to share with you, including some really simple garments that are made out of shapes no more complicated than this rectangle right here. Thanks so much for watching, and happy crocheting!